If you hit me like every 5 seconds, I'll be okay.
As a debater,
Yeah.
I
It's a
feel
new app,
very
so
old.
it's like I'm not gonna know exactly when to look up. It's
I hear
All right,
that.
all right.
I'll try my best though. Okay.
Is the plan in here?
Yep. Here, let me pull it up in a second.
Is it the right one?
No, it's not. Just give me the right one. It'll be fine. Just hand it to me.
What?
We should get going.
Okay.
Exactly. It's a plan.
Classic. Okay, are we all good to go? Advantage one is far better benefit manager, transparency, improves the farmer marketing, creates more effective pricing when it comes to 70 PBMs. I play large list price. I most directly benefited by most directly benefited the PBM manufacturing charge high list pricing to low transaction cost rating and strong benefit incentive for PBMs and complicated pricing. I diminish the beneficial role. I price play reforms establish transparent pricing for IP doctors will benefit growth and pricing will match the growth. Healthcare pricing and sustainability workers on system reforms and improve competitiveness of the entire U.S. health system. Transparency is key to life science innovation development. 70 innovation and life science greatly improved outreach of the United States fight against market dynamic service really just because of lack of price transparency. I say always have a number of reasons and attempt to work toward developing sustainable innovation like transparency, economy, sustaining innovation, repeating CGI, factors having a competitive entry. Innovation will be much more efficiently allowed negotiation by transparency led by negotiation would be more efficient led by negotiation transparently on the open market where information is available. That's key to biotech authors show forward 70 scientific advancement lead difference with enhancing capabilities explain public and national security threats about research and with different regulatory interests horrible biological agents, I can also speak anti-speaking, I take various like the recent terrors have been struck away out biological pathogens propagated over the defenses and prepare medical countermeasures like individualized ophthalmologist support cover the private industry is built to attack and open use genetic information to identify biologies increasing continued advances will mitigate birth by engineering epidemics and weaponizing biological materials continued innovation and dominance in life sciences will apply opportunities to mitigate whereas bioweapons are extension will let 17 bioweapons certain human extension disease events have been responsible for the heavily death tools and future pandemic result in outright human extinction there were instances of increasing volume extending human population almost entirely wiped out the advances by biotech law 100% case matters and fatality rate and environmental survival vectors and modified possibility of working increase non-zero actions customers regulators reducing addition to basic and shape which laws future generations should not be given less value mitigation measures would be effective to properly detect and terrorize the agent providing critical poverty response to short-term biosecurity key application for communities long-term future running a moderate attack I can find large wires escalating over which could evolve into exercise ways block state efforts of prescription drug transparency to lower generic costs IPs violence or as a party 18 state health warrants have been thwarted by a resident chief market prescription drug costs and medical bills are spending with 90% medical bills cost push up I think I've been something that costs me balance with the state law doesn't get up PBMs are recognizing for rebates and saving rights on not pass on the people manufacturer doubling the attention away from marketing and efforts in states try to pass on states are pushing for more direct regulation we can rise at least have limited resources we have any and all state laws insurance or accepted I did extend the obligation to do rise plans our rise states from requiring PBM to disclose markup of dead shoes healthcare management care choice documentation trumps and if the internally Franklin 70 making sure organization utilization review insurance I determines whether the doctor's course of action is medically necessary if not the insurance will not cover the cost managed care organization engaged in insurance that costs or come our call by having alter treating the doctor patient relationship with documentation no managed care agreeing to waste for being to be insured seeking the priest entirely any kind of hard injuries not from their insurance if it improve necessary to her liability force organization that turn internalize costs I was preparing for future remedial gap in which other malpractice trouble I tumble legal orders and mean for liability and trust and key to warranties of vaccination where I know 10 any factor public health measures I must rely on public trust to be successful or some crossing Canadian spread of the disease the challenge and insurance people have felt them much required they trust that individual running certain many mass vaccination programs for population vaccinations and quarantines of isolation require high levels of trust make them impossible to enforce without voluntary compliance key to herd immunity out there 1200 meetings of the protection we can vulnerable that arises when enough of the population is vaccinated protects everyone government conduct over the vaccinated and those who can't be conduct with the field by helping spread the virus extinction models and spread brown recursion for me it's been hypothesized that I quickly doesn't host by how time to spread this assumption is they always like more complex models of word once in transmission or really high levels can evolve their the host population in different pathogens can alter violence there are almost there are numerous historical examples I've had devastating effect on a large number would make global handing very ruthless civilization and insurance to keep the disease something else affecting modeling ensures good defense widening costs and love and I survive I realize on over top pieces I must have accident health there's no record like health insurance I avoid not your health distance I discriminate poorly between appropriate and inappropriate care and avoid both equally even small release of infection agent might be devastatingly effective using low tech reduce infection and raise odds broad spread of the disease this is not a speculation natural experiment that assimilated and hack demonstrated vulnerability and the population to spread disease funding alone might not guarantee access to rights to ensure the long-term failure of every coverage lab by destroying state-based innovation uniformity goods not unique larger on 70 rights impeding the ability to partner to achieve body key plans on rights to between Congress and goal under the ACA attempts to decrease uniformities on odds with the rights with the way rights are created strong often have plans of law state, the court rules the rights of the law wants, I attempt to apply the ESC, exactly by exactly by being inconsistent, unpredictable, unpredictability, but federal courts, the ESC, the enormous federalism question, will it's will to repeal the Senate for some men's rights, it might be funded those who have choice on a collision course with the rights, thus the plan,
That's right.
The United States federal government should establish national health insurance by offering significant financial incentives for states to establish health insurance, including federal fallback measures and adjustments to relevant federal regulations. Here's the solvency advocate back in 1917. Congress should place condition on the money disbursement to states. Congress prevents states from subject to federal action requiring states to use federal money to achieve universal comprehensive affordable health coverage while establishing a plan for accountability and fiscal viability. States should use federal money to complete health insurance. The entitlement should be articulated at a high level of generality and implemented in a manner that gives the states are moving to adopt their own distinctive approach. States would exercise federal law granted powers. Here's how it works. Make sure in March 95, Congress enacted enabling legislation operating fiscal sports states establishing health insurance and be federally established. I stand in states to be the following standards: universality. All citizens and resident aliens must be guaranteed coverage, comprehensiveness, minimum benefits, practically states the option of adding portability. Each participating state would recognize coverage accountability, fiscal viability, state plans, and a reasonable plan for cost containment. States will be financially responsible. Congress must enact accompanying legislation to as a reform or rights of the law states. Sufficient legal instruction states to retain autonomy in deciding how to make standards operational. They can pursue maintenance competition or select a single payer individual mandates, vouchers, subsidies, or a combination of these as long as they satisfy the basic national coverage. Advantage 3 is federalism. The ACA was massive federal overreach into state health insurance regulation. Rosenbaum enforcing federal law continues to displace state regulation and completely preempt state law. The ACA preserves the partner instructions considerably ramping up the level of federal intervention into insurance regulation. The acts of substantive intervention is so against the fundamentally altered the character of the state health insurance product that spills over and deters cooperative federalism. Block and 30 Republican-controlled states reject Congress's effort to let states run the act intended to the state's decision not to participate, open the door to a host of federal takeover that must pave the way for additional corruption. The federalism question is starting to recur. Major federal programs are like state implementation that comes opinion injecting significant uncertainty and cooperative federalism may result in Congress using less of these federal statutory implementation relations over the critical federalism relation to the statutory area. Real work to be done is recognizing Congress's centrality and the need for legal rules. Govern the cooperation conditional spending is due for federalism in the context of healthcare bagging and 70 federalism means anything. Federalism means anything. National judgment should not supersede state judgment. If others should use the money more effectively, the state with rapid rules will come under pressure to rebuild what seemed to be stupid. It's not after all. Federalism applies when we recognize women's overall meaning letting the states away their crazy practice. At the same time, Congress has placed conditions money disperses strong cooperative federalism, forces moderation of GOP and Trump agenda, and 70 federalism presents overreach, state national policies and force compromise. Washington can't go at all when Congress makes a law. It lacks the resources to enforce or relies on state. The Supreme Court creates cooperation, but also uncooperative federalism. State officials use unleveraged and shape national policy, refusing their partners to set the agenda and creating incentives for compromise. It creates resource in PC. That's why Trump has a lot more time to compromise with Dems in Sacramento. And then Trump and the GOP don't know how many checks Trump has always want to enact national policy. They must build consensus to the other side that is spending time and money to crack down. Take reasons away from fights. That's necessary and sufficient to prevent U.S. Democratic backsliding, making it 17 U.S. making U.S. maybe had to authoritarianism, American commitment to democracy, no guarantee against backsliding, nor constitutional tax bureaucracy, the free press, and maybe Trump's ability to mobilize public support limited. If he performs poorly, that will determine a democracy fake backsliding. Would take place either little steps which tilt the playing field and either favor the ruling party and maybe tempting to assume U.S. centuries democracy impervious such confidence in this place. The country became fully democratic in the 70s. So have a long identified polarization as a central factor, but a democratic breakdown is norms we can have to survive the party controlling. I've never used the full extent of the party systematic underutilization has long survived as a vital source of stability. Trump has given such an issue to moves what we call a version of our constitution ambiguities lead considerable form for executive abuse in the absence of informal levels of cooperation. Even the best designed constitution cannot shield democracy. Decentralization also hampers manipulation. The greatest threat is unpopularity. Politicians will have an easier time pushing judges, pushback, extinction, cost for all 17. Easier find freedom was bound to defend freedom everywhere. The existential threat is very real terrorism. Extremist parties are paranoid, tyranny, North Korea threatening nuclear blackman, an aggressive KGB dictator wants to turn the world back to a dark past. Against their survival, started by the values of the free world, epitomized by the U.S. They are thriving. As the U.S. has retreated, American leadership against that stability is the greatest strength of democracy, strong institution, that allows politicians, not allowed for long-range planning. Democracy is the only proven remedy for every crisis that plagues the world. I have 20 seconds.
You're good. Proud of you.
Me too. We're taking breath.
regulate the way that states implement the plan?
The federal government sets a baseline for what the states have to do and then provides money for the states to implement.
Yeah, what is that baseline?
Natalie, you can answer that question better than I can.
That baseline is that the states have to provide national health insurance. We think that that means it covers all or nearly all citizens and is some form of a comprehensive benefits package. We don't think that your
Okay.
picks out of like one service compete, but
Sure.
the states have to cover most things.
Does that mandate like transparency? How do you ensure that that happens?
Okay, so the internal link to the transparency advantage is based on states' ability to regulate pharmacy benefit manager transparency and the interaction with ERISA, which we think is a law that would necessarily be amended as per implementation of the app. So I think the evidence that describes this best is the last card in the advantage, it's the fused brown card. And it says that state-led healthcare reform efforts to create transparency with PBMs have been thwarted by the way that ERISA implementation works.
And the app amends ERISA in what way?
The app makes it such that state plans do not interfere with ERISA, would be a logical conclusion of the way that federal law has to be amended for the app.
Okay, how do you would, uniqueness claim to, the second advantage is about managed care. How does the app transition away from that?
So the way that managed care organizations conduct utilization review based on how ERISA statute operates is based on ERISA preemption. So ERISA preemption as it currently exists interferes with how litigation happens after, say, a patient sues a doctor because they think they weren't provided adequate care by their managed care organization, or if someone sues an insurance company because they weren't provided life-saving care or their family members weren't provided life-saving care. The app changes that and makes it such that those hospitals are held liable because that ERISA statute no longer preempts litigation in state courts.
So the internal link to trust is just predicated on patients' ability to litigate providers?
And the provision of insurance, because we think that creating insurance is also necessary for doctor-patient trust relationships to work. So there are two internal links to that advantage.
Advantage 3, the individual mandate just got repealed. What parts of the ACA are massive federal overreach?
Well, the parts of the ACA that are the most important, that would most likely be the Medicaid expansion. That's a form of coercing the states instead of providing a necessary inducement to make states and the federal government work together. The fact that the implementation of the states did not allow the GOP-led states to run their own exchanges was problematic and made it so there was not an effective method of cooperative federalism.
Okay, and the argument is cooperative federalism in the case of the app is just predicated off of giving them money?
It's predicated off of money, but also a cooperative regulatory approach. So I think both pieces of 1AC solvency evidence that we read speaks to the way in which the mechanism the app implements, which is financial incentives combined with federal cooperation.
I guess I'm just wondering why the app isn't coercive in the sense that the states only get the money if they do the thing.
Well,
like conditional spending is coercion in the sense of federalism.
It's distinct from preemptive coercion, which is what the federal government would rely on if it weren't for conditional spending models. Wouldn't say that's worse.
I'm gonna take a few more seconds to prep.
It's
Produce
based
life
on
science research.
transparency.
But if the pharmaceutical industry produces life science research, and that's good.
Well, but the pharmaceutical industry can't produce life science research without transparency.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering if it's the vehicle is the pharma industry.
Yeah, the pharma industry matters.
For sure.
Sorry, wasn't sure.
No, you're totally fine. I was asked this one. Okay, stop rep. How much is it?
712.
Okay. All right, it's been sent. you're gonna break a new app on us, and then you're gonna break the computer.
Yeah, seriously.
All right, it'll be 7 off. The pharma life sciences advantage, the disease trust advantage, and the federalism advantage.
Sorry, can you say case order one more time?
In case orders want to see it.
Okay.
What is this for, Carol?
I think you'll be fine. If you get it standing, it usually doesn't fall.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. If we have to abort the 7th, we'll let you know. Just keep on standby. All right. Is everyone ready? Awesome. Topicality interpretation, national health insurance fees, public insurance programs administered by the government. The plan makes the government a payer in the insurance market, not necessarily a single payer. Immigrant 92 and NHI implies an active role for the government rather than subsidized private arrangements. Government create private insurance programs. They extend the government obviously depends on financing administration percentage of the population covered and benefits of private governments decide which groups are to be covered by the public insurance. The government programs tend to cut into the biblical clientele for private insurance. Vote negative versus limits for including private insurance distorts literature basis by allowing the app to subsidize, facilitate, or regulate any private insurance market and make it more accessible. Second is ground. Their interpretation is by directional bliss, balance of ground in the private sector. Good is coordinate ground. That's key to topic education and fairness. Next up, the states counter Texas 50 states and U.S. territory should establish an interstate compact to establish national health insurance, including federal fallback measures and adjustments. Fund this program through new revenue sources and creating an exemption to balance budget amendments for spending and borrowing to pay for health and for insurance. Solve the case. Jackal 17 now multi-state healthcare compact student acting nationwide agenda comprehensive resource populations. If they join a compact, they can reap economies of scale, saving costs on the size of the enrollment put in bargaining. Power comics allows consistency laws by coordinating states could pay new systems scratchers over 200 active comics. 22 national agencies and modern comics have authority to generate revenue, engage in rulemaking. States regulate enter into agreements without lawmakers' approval. Supreme Court subordinate them. Congressional approvals not necessary. Congress rarely says no to states. It's more dangerous political to not respect the will of states. Interstate health exchanges could operate without lawmakers' consent under the holdings in U.S. Steel Corporation. They might even get congressional approval. Next off is the base disadvantage. Republicans support for Trump is solid and oscillates between 80 and 90%. Gal 318. We have a really cool little chart for this. Trump voters hate the government healthcare financing for plan. 17 strong conservative free market share. We know we're in opposition to the government provided health care. The American preservation is 20% intense support. Rebuilding healthcare law into the late 70% where less likely to say that healthcare law should be rebuilt, but still 2/3 favor doing so. Strong insurance 31% believe the government does not have responsibility to ensure health insurance. The free market can solve economic problems, and now we also repeal the healthcare law. Free market years 25%. 9% think the regulations become discussed. Free market solve best solve, and government does not need to provide health insurance. And Congress should repeal the health care law. Trump will first strike North Korea to rebuild its public popularity goes nuclear. Kanye 17 to strike by Trump will lead to wider conflagration. This calculation depends on two devastating conflict. Trump because he agreed to strike against North Korea as the ultimate diversion from his domestic problem. The temptation to strike first must be very appealing from President desperate to rally to support at home and risk international confrontation. The politics disadvantage of small banking form of legislation is likely to pass now, but Trump's Capitol's key report of 314 at the White House expresses support over the Senate bill. Enters Congress support ahead in hopes of sworn and of the legislative achievement of government's list support when discussing any future visions in the House is interested in making and with the goal of bipartisan progress of Dodd-Frank relief reaching his desk as soon as possible. Health insurance cost political capital program 16 there is really realistic prospect for that a drastic overhaul could be enacted. No politics involves the trade-offs. It is hard to see why it makes any sense or to spend political capital on a coaxial attempt to add a do-over of health care reform. We saw small banking's key to innovation. Wicker 3 to 13 fall gains. Small banks have found high compliance costs and regulatory uncertainty as unsustainable. So community banks can also strengthen research as the source of small bank loans, and this access to capital could make the difference for an innovative startup. The innovation deters global common tailored for the tech capabilities to influence leadership about the balance of power between states and after rolling calculations of war history until the nations on the antagonist and experience of corresponding and dramatic change in their global stature and influence great powers which fail to maintain their place strict and fate. Tech is very cornerstone of domination and is transferred to as the main vehicle by which war and change occur in world politics. The balance of offensive and defensive military technology affects the incentives of war. Next up is the incrementalism disadvantage political momentum for single payer now. Incremental forms like the app undercut momentum. Wellman 1227 Republicans embrace modest fixes and expand opportunities for coverage had they done, and then the pressure to move to a universal government program might have been established. Instead, Republicans did just enough damage to give depth. Nobody to go much further. Broader public seems ready to hear proposals for universal coverage built on government insurance. The administrative complexity of multi-payer causes burnout that crushes any shortages. Only single payers all sake of 17 single payers. You need the position to address burnout. Insufficient inside bureaucratic tests is the primary reason for burnout. The clinicians no longer worried about needing to meet revenue quotas. Really a major key motivator for burnout is long as healthcare remains a commodity, physicians will burn out. Physician shortages wreck rural hospitals, causes U.S. food production collapse. Almond 16 talent shortages making it impossible for rural health organizations without town rural organizations will be unable to deliver healthcare. And if too many rural organizations go out of business, it becomes international security for rural communities. Healthcare is the largest employer. Then the largest employer is the business. The community collapses rural. The community collapses rural. America produces with the rest of the country. As the source of food dries out, the price will go through the roof. Hyperinflation becomes rowdy, and printed money becomes worthless use. Ag collapse goes nuclear to multiple hotspots. Castle 17 the U.S. faces threats such as ISIS and wars with North Korea over Iran. Competition with Russia and China could spiral out of control. Reliable food supplies and stable prices produce stable countries. Food insecurity, drives massive migration, generating conflicts, disrupting our economic, military, and diplomatic relationships. Rising income produces demand for foods and rights from American farmers. Emerging markets furnish 20% of U.S. ag exports, and that is expected to grow. These to deteriorate into shooting wars. Next up is the advantage context. The United States federal government should redirect its data mining operations towards disease monitoring, create and grant the Center for Disease Control permission to advance use of self-replenishing emergency disease and relief funds, stockpile necessary medical countermeasures to biological agents, pass the Medical Countermeasures Innovation Act, and repeal the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion. Data computing solves ban for 15 the NSA's data mining capability could be redirected to search the internet for indications of a new disease and publicly available data. The agency could use its tech for early detection of infectious diseases and transmitting this information. Emergency fund solves SA-17. The U.S. is hopefully unprepared to meet this threat because it does not have set aside money to beat an outbreak. What is needed is funding, and nobody's needed is funding that is always available. Creating a rainy day fund could save lives. So it's made 90% of the Ebola deaths could have been prevented. The agency would have been able to unleash a massive effort right away. There was no flexibility in the CDC's budget. Go to, do you want to go to case?
No, read the counterplan.
Counterplan. Courts. The United States federal judiciary should rule that customary international law requires the creation of national health insurance by offering a significant financial incentive to for states to establish health insurance, including federal evolving measures and adjustments for relevant federal regulations in the United States. So judicial action solves NHI solidifies ILO with binding and enforceable precedent according to the right to health doctrine as ripened into international rule of customary international law. The requirement to uphold the right to health is enforced by courts when states enforce a legal doctrine and the courts accept the binding nature of the doctrine. The doctrine thus upholds the authority of the United States under international law. The CB competes only related in the absence of simultaneous domestic legislation creates binding precedent for CIL. Copy Law 2002. Well, there is agreement that CIL plays some role to the extent that will determine whether CIL or Congress controls the domestic courts or whether or not. Which determine whether CIL or Congress controls domestic legislation. CIL may not be directly incorporated into U.S. law without statutory support. The number of cases using CIL is still few based on enabling federal statute taking the first steps in applying CIL. We become crucial precedent in the longing process that Congress would be able to powerless to overturn the judicial application of ILO. So extinction, negative 14 sovereignty is responsible for generating problems that challenge the survival of humanity's several scenarios are global war states no longer have effective monopoly proliferation remains of regular WG nuclear biological threat, apocalypse, terrorism, violable ecosystem, and climate change, population increase, food security, and clean water, natural catastrophes. So atmospheric collisions, any global pandemics will be beyond the capacity of any single state. These issues underscore they need to strengthen global rule of law and it's development for a new paradigm of global governance. The first advantage, we are past peak farming now, it's going to collapse now. Second, it's been the pace is bound to decline. The cost of new drugs is increasing exponentially. Abrams law, that means cost double every 8 years. The new nuggets have all been found. The value of antibiotics is negative. New antibiotics is negative. $45 million. For us, the amount of refined drugs will disappear and they will go patent. We already found most of the drugs that we will ever find. None of them will go continue to make money. We reach peak pharma. We reach peak pharma. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go but down. Things like the opioid crisis and medical marijuana legalization. Thumb disadvantage. Also no impact to bioterrorism unless it's 14 bioterrorism. Method release the risk of biological bioterrorism to be quite small. This is impacted by historical evidence and knowledge and resources necessary for scaling storage and dissemination presents significant barriers. Will we just respond to an attack by making treatment free for everyone? Peterson 14 is likely in the event of the United U.S. will set up an emergency distribution centers where all people receive antibiotics without regard to for insurance as in the CDC. Smallpox response plan, smallpox vaccination program serve as a model for universal access. The second advantage, countries and other it's contained in other countries because they trust their doctors because it's government funded, which means that when a disease goes to another country, we just get stopped. Physician trust is high and rising now by 17 in the face of political turbulence. Trust is rising. Healthcare made about promising advances in trust globally and in the U.S. The public is recognizing the progress advances in trust are noteworthy. All causes of trust and access. Insurance and alone is insufficient. Factor 14 people who don't have access to a car struggle to get to medical appointments. Patient avoid seeing a doctor because they fear being diagnosed. Consumers lack an understanding how insurance plans work. And Hispanic African American communities she often sees a psychological barrier in many families because of that fear. Won't see a doctor. Patients who don't speak English face particular challenges. Vaccine leadership behind Alpha 16 U.S. has long history of leadership and success in global immunization and played an important role. And the GVAP includes various specific goals and targets on vaccine issues ranging from equitable coverage to improving delivery systems. Tons of support for global vaccine diffusion in the status quo. Also, non-infectious disease, relative 17 natural pandemics are likely to cause extinction. Recorded extinctions less than 4% were described infectious disease. Our own species very new very new global source and capable of rational response. Lethal pathogens can kill the host before they spread. There is like depression not to be lethal. Government payment kills trust. Right? Fraud 16. Government periods critical and dangerous lack of time and resources. This can interfere with the payment. Patients this can interfere with the ability of patients to get the time that they want. The feeling of having a doctor having one foot in and one foot out. This is frustrating. These lead patients not to understand diagnosis, treatment, terms of doctor-patient relationships. They can foster poor compliance with treatment, insufficient time, and can lead to medical errors and offering more tests. The consequences can be quite costly in health and dollars. They are drivers of physician burnout. The federals have managed the ACA set up a strong partnership in healthcare and in health policy, and the preserves federals and brought them on 14. The relationship is more effective than the federal and the state governments. The ACA establishes reform that rests on the shoulders of this relationship. The act establishes expands the federal-state partnership and the regulation. The act expands the joint investment for the poor through expanded Medicaid. Court decision is an all cost of democracy, covering 12 civil history. They recorded this as one of the most significant cases in the jurisprudence of cooperative federalism. Roberts Courts. Roberts Courts became among the first to individuate a federal spending statute as unconstitutionally coercive. This has the potential to impact federal statute cooperative agreements far beyond healthcare. The decision exemplifies the extent to which federalism enforcement continues to be dominated by these concepts. There's a bunch of all causes to federalism, such as Trump, and also states are unable to stop Trump because he has authority over things like launching nuclear weapons and things like sanctuary cities and sessions. Jack federalism, no issue spillover. Ryan 12 bargaining between federal state and federal power difference from zero-sum federalism. The Ryan 12 part is marked as zero-sum federalism.
Cool. Good to go?
Yeah, whenever you're
The state's counterplan, it says that you establish an interstate compact. Does that mean all 50 states are establishing it together?
yeah.
Okay, so it would be a uniform 50-state compact.
Yes.
Okay, the base DA, this Edkins evidence is saying that the vast majority of voters would support overturning the ACA. To go for the base DA, you have to overturn the ACA.
No. It just says that they would like it if the AC was overturned.
But this evidence is saying that, like, the base support is strong now, yet there is still strong opposition to the fact that the government is running.
The base would love it if Trump did a lot of certain things, but they still like what he's done so far, like tax reform. In a world in which tax reform gets rolled back because there's massive taxes to pay for government health care.
This evidence is saying there's current backlash to current statutes,
This
such as the ACA.
This evidence doesn't say they're backlashing against Trump. They don't like the ACA, which they perceive as Obama having done, and Congress
So
is
this-
not blocking Trump.
Wait. So talk about Obama did the ACA, so why would Trump doing a healthcare policy be unpopular?
Obama did the ACA. If Trump and his main campaign promise was repeal and replace, repealed the ACA and replaced it with something 10 times stronger, including massive tax increases, they would be furious at Trump. Not only because he went back on that campaign promise, but because he made it even
But
worse.
I thought the campaign promise was to repeal and replace.
Right.
If he repeals and replaces with
it's-
something better, why would they do
Hold
that?
on, something better is the question. It's repeal and wrong replace. In fact, it's way worse. It's massive tax increases where the government is now paying
So
for everyone's health insurance.
the link is predicated on tax increases then?
The link is predicated on tax increases and government involvement in healthcare, which are evidence cites Harvard polls on every single
Can I
group of
ask
conservatives.
a quick question?
go for it.
For my first question is, what counterplans is that a net benefit to?
For the base disadvantage, the advantage counterplan and the courts.
And what counterplans is the incrementalism
Oh,
be
and
a net
states.
benefit
What?
to?
The incrementalism one?
Yeah,
The advantage counterplan.
the advantage counterplan. Okay. My next question is about the courts counterplan. So the judiciary rules that CAL requires creation of national health insurance. Who then creates those financial incentives? Would Congress still do it? Like, where does the money come
Congress
from?
would then have to follow the binding precedent of the court.
Okay, so the court creates a binding precedent, then Congress follows it, then Congress follows the same process as the F.
Yes.
Okay.
Status of everything.
Conditional.
Is there a net benefit to the court's counterplan besides the internal one
Internal one and
Politics.
base disadvantage.
and the politics DA?
Mhm.
But doesn't it result in Congress having to create national health insurance?
Because Trump was forced to by.
But then why would that link, then why would it not link to the Congress DA? Because why wouldn't that require massive amount of political capital?
We're not.
They don't have to push, the courts made them.
Yeah.
No, except for you still have to
Trump
pass
doesn't
it.
have to push, the courts.
So the argument is that Trump doesn't have to push it, it just means the courts.
Right. The political capital disadvantage is based on Trump having to convince Republicans and Democrats to get on board with the banking bill, or in the world of the
Why
plan, with
does
the plan.
Trump
In a
have
world
to
of-
be pushing for the plan?
Why does Trump have to push for the plan? Because he's the one that signs it, and he's the one that has to rally enough support. We think that's a reasonable interpretation of the topic. It's a weird topic, obviously, with a liberal topic and a conservative president, but we think the neg should have some politics just adds.
Thanks, Brett. advantage, the healthcare disease advantage, the federalism advantage, T, the state's counterplan, the customary international law counterplan, the advantage counterplan, the incrementalism DA, the politics DA, and the base DA.
Bioweapons are existential and outweigh the DA's Chinese developments, insecure information, and weak life science regulations, and certain miscalculation, and unpredictable spread. The AF is key. A strong life science industry creates long-term innovation and most effective response capabilities. We're not past peak pharma. All of our evidence says it's possible to create effective innovation as long as there's transparency in the industry. Other alt causes just prove that there's a brink for effective innovation. The impact was extended above. We wouldn't make treatment free, and it would be too late. The internal link is that we have to have insurance coverage to use innovation in a way that's most effective to prevent short-term spread that would result in miscalculation and retaliation. The disease advantage outweighs and escalates weak vaccinations, poor healthcare, and imperfect monitoring create the conditions for evolution that make small diseases spread up and spill fast. That's our Kersher code. Other countries aren't insufficient to solve global spillover. If it spreads through the U.S., physician trust is inadequate because MCOs have the ability to intervene in treatment, which means patients are receiving the most effective care. Alternative causes can't overcome our internal link because we provide full insurance coverage, which means that patients and doctors have the ability to develop more effective relationships through preventative care. Vaccine leadership is inadequate because we don't have the technology or innovation to implement vaccines, and people don't have health care in the first place. Global vaccinations are inadequate because we've read U.S. key evidence. The impact of disease was extended above, and government payment doesn't decrease trust. Our evidence is in the context of status quo coverage, not free coverage, and the internal link is about MCOs, which proves it's inevitable and there's no uniqueness for the term. Federalism, strong cooperative federalism prevents democratic blacksliding as a result of Trump's incoherent policy that hurts U.S. credibility and breaks down the democratic model. American leadership starts with our international model. It's the only way to credibly respond to North Korea, terrorist groups, and Middle Eastern extremism. That's our Castro evidence. The ACA was inadequate because it created federal mandates that didn't allow for any state-based innovation or once these solvents. Evidence speaks to the way that the F overcomes that model and creates new formats for collaboration. The NFIB isn't an alt cause to democracy. It's just uniqueness and a reason why new precedent is key because we can overcome the way that Trump implements top-down federal policies. The same is true of other alternative causes evidence because we've read evidence that says that our model spills over and there no spillover card isn't specific to the F. Now, T. We meet. It's public and administered by the government. NHI's universal basic insurance is operated in part by the federal government. Daughter and national health insurance refers to any arrangement for national pooling of healthcare risk that provides universal basic health coverage for all Americans and operated at least in part by the federal government. In Canada, national health insurance is a collection of provincial health insurance programs which are regulated and partly funded by the national government. The insurance of NHI is used with authorities to national government to arrange for equitable and universal health insurance. It solves limits in ground because it excludes small-scale private sector non-universal apps, and there's no link to bidirectionality. App innovation, specific enforcement mechanisms are good in real-world reasonability. Competing interpretations can erase the bomb that arbitrarily excludes the app. The state's counterplan proves to both. Prove the counterplan, prove the combination of all the planks. The app. If the app links to the DAs, then so does the counterplan because it's just state-based implementation and people can't tell the difference between top-down U.S. policy. It solves 0% of the app. Advantage 1 is based on data rights regulations that the counterplan can overturn. In turn, advantage 2 is based on the fact that ERISA impedes and doctor-patient trust, and we need universal insurance. Advantage 3 is based on the cooperative federalism model that the counterplan can't create. The CAL counterplan, permitted the counterplan, it only competes based on immediacy, which is bad because it makes it impossible to be app and justifies delayed counterplan. That's also a voting issue because it justifies picks out of 1 day because we need to wait for some stupid contrived reason, which means we never have topic conversation. It links to all of the other Ds because it deletes implementation of the app. There's a delay which causes death gaps, failed suit, and denied medical coverage. It causes interim suffering and death. Immediacy matters. 2007-3-14 changes. Then Oregon came after many states have taken up the pricing, and Congress hasn't been able to advance the issues. The legislators are considering sending appeals of harm injuries, resisting the process and lobbyists to take efforts around the country. All of the debate comes during the national attention to drug pricing. Started by the infamous price hikes. There hasn't been meaningful action from the federal government. Permutation, do the plan through the counterplan's process. The counterplan is a way to implement the plan. Debate over whether or not to do the plan, not how. Permutation, do both. Neither is severance. It's a genuine process. The perm forgets the entire counterplan process and the F. There's no solvency. It's too vague. Door 11. Charming passage should not be used to interpret the AUMF. Consistent phrasing demonstrate the lack of an agreement. How to make use of statute before the charming to be used. There are many interpretations of the canon. Not church test that the girl should be cautious and rely on the canon to interpret domestic legislation, it seems to make sense to conclude that Congress would not want courts to smuggle and not incorporated international norms into domestic law. U.S. adherence to international law is done under Trump, Goldsmith, and 17. We're witnessing the beginnings of the greatest presidential onslaught of law. The onslaught has been driven by economic nationalism with the international law is law and American values. Getting State Department Cassidy Trump is trying to gut State Department Cassidy's process to catch up with the State Department budgets, implementing economic and domestic agencies, led to international elections halts and new international agreements and moratorium on numerous treaties. It's not looking so good for the human rights treaties. Increases in termination of international agreements, Trump's friends to terminate the Iran deal and NAFTA, disengagement from international organizations and international courts. Law fails. Gosson, Taylor, 8. The fundamental challenge of global health governance is the state nature of international law, with potential limitations in the ability to incorporate the non-state actors in global health governance. Non-state actors, corporations, and private enterprises are playing increasingly important roles. The international law does not provide a sufficient basis to fully realize collaboration. International law needs to evolve, marking that piece of evidence it resolves. The disease counterfund links to all of the DAs if it leads to insurance. If it doesn't, it solves none of the act because it can't create cooperative federalism, repeal RISA, or implement better doctor-patient trust. Perm do both. Perm do combinations of all the plank and perm do the counterfund. It undermines ABR. Content 7. The cost of pharmaceuticals can be prohibited. Patients obtain antimicrobials from other countries. Supplication linked to antimicrobial resistance. Such practices are more widespread than realized. 2 to 6% maintain antibiotics for source within prescription. More people turn for medications and introduce antimicrobial resistance through suboptimal drugs. Much of the blame for resistance has been placed on inappropriate antibiotic practices. That makes quarantines the only option. Hymen 5. The novel pathogens may not be amenable to existing modern medical countermeasures and require strategies to limit counteraction, whereas medical interventions do not exist. The halls to fast-spreading diseases. The only recourse may be to employ stricter measures, including quarantines, and control the spread by disrupting transmission. It's key to vaccination. Only the app solves it. Second 15. Willingness of individuals to vaccinate themselves with profound impacts on community public health. Each prevents increases in vaccination coverage contributes to significant reduction in diseases. The factors create barriers to vaccination disease. Several factors create barriers to vaccination disease, include a lack of trust in medical establishments. All of their planks are just about monitoring and providing new resources, which doesn't work. Absent insurance, incrementalism. The app solves. It's not multi-payer insurance, which is what their internal link about. Cooperative federalism turns ad. Commissioner 15. The internal considerations affect the realities of agriculture and the industry across the states. Administrative like relations are handled problematic because of distribution. SMA will analytically sensitive to the regional considerations. Many agencies will be driven out of the business. Their races price dramatically, contribute to mishandling farms that may disappear, and our food supply will become inherently less safe. It's further centralization occurs. The FSMA should be implemented and when they're recognizing these stage realities, reinvesting in cooperative federalism. Marked cooperative federalism, the AFS federalism model spills over to long-term reform, customer aid. The state federal care experimentation offers the best chance to enact federal healthcare reform. State initiatives provide value for the ability to observe implementation. Many state plans have negative attributes to be avoided, and the federal government can cherry pick to build a comprehensive solution. Further experimentation advances the debates and leads to the most effective solution. The state's proven to be a fantastic laboratory for one decision to focus on identification and treatment of chronic illnesses appears to be an excellent way to combat the rising costs by observing the implementation of the state plans. The federal government can avoid implementing negative reports that which derail national health care reform and their political obstacles. Nixon 17 will put the pair off in polls, while details have been following the toxic single payers repeals. Less repeal in place. A single payer plan has been the goal for progressives for a century, nor did its supporters fare any better in the Obama administration. One can imagine a less ambitious approach. Even this approach is likely to run into fierce political opposition with its grassroots committed to maximalist positions. Feasibility will be taken for granted. And the Dems won't push. 1318. Democrats appears to be converging on the agenda. Warren introduced ACA 2.0. It's our inclusive very single payer process. Lovers have been talking about. Sponsors included Sanders, Harris, and Gillibrand. The vehicle tool buy-in from the senators is likely to run out on the liberal side. The most liberal wing is revealing strong pragmatic streak when it comes to healthcare, politics. The app creates innovation because it improves the pharmaceutical industry, which spills over to other economic growth. There's no impact to innovation. The card is too big. It doesn't speak to any specific forms of growth. Nothing passes Congress until the midterms. Phillips and Newton, the lawmakers will be done working for the year. Republicans don't have the consensus in the next big thing to do this, and they're trying to run out of time to figure it out. If they wanted to make a hack at the NDT, they would have heard how to getting it done with the midterm election. It's the only possible for us lawmakers to take politically tough votes from their jobs could be on the line. No major problems need to be reauthorized, and Congress can just as easily get the can on the road. Republicans forcing any attempt to win over the Democrats. Mark the Democrats. Healthcare rights inevitable. Harbison in 17. Republicans are the year divided. Whether to tear down Obamacare, whether to repeal the legislative agenda. They don't want to take repeal off of the table. Which for conservatives, the truth is split over whether or not healthcare or social programs, including Medicare, Medicaid, the opioid crisis, driving disturbing upon U.S. elections, when the city pathetic politics on Obamacare, maybe political analysis on the House blocked a Senate effort to fund the cost-sharing subsidies. That risk could reappear almost automatically. Finance Committee making changes now. It forces reconciliation and drains capital. Robert 314. Unlike the House, but the legislature will not touch a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. A long-time target Republican lawmakers, chairman of the House Financial Services Committee suggested that he did not expect to rubber stamp the legislation that passed the Senate. Democrats hope to avoid a conference process that would lead to changes they would find unacceptable. The House overreaches. They would slow down the bill's progress. Trump has no effect on the agenda. Wabin 312. Hogpile meeting with everyone he knew. Everything said he would simply ignore liberals and conservatives when it comes to Trump's mouth. Policy is all meaningless. We've seen this power before. Trump says some surprising things within the few days. The White House makes it clear that he's not taking the position he advocated. Trump's position on anything is policy. It's Schrodinger's cat when the cameras turn on. He starts in on one of his extraneous riffs. That's long. Stupid Ezra card. I'm marking it. Base DA. Congress and Trump's advisors create fake victories. Bernstein 16. How can we ensure that he's getting away without creating a disaster? The administration will be to very harmless battles. The tweeter can say he's taking decisive action. The president was Obama with Hal McKinnon. How could you anything with involving South Asia? spread someplace new to announce Islamic things about Saddam, abase and bomb away. Congress and civil servants can manipulate all presidents, marking it all presidents. He's losing support now. Rogers 117 Trump's hitting themselves when they say the president's face is happy. Trump's tours the Tuesday and people people by and large tradition with the gender arguing the basis and turn off. He's misguiding. Comments when immigrants was a net minus and immigrants with a strong link with the president's dropped 9 points and Trump's base is being tracked. Data points in public picture. The president's behavior turns off some traditional GOP voters. Last shot scenarios don't make sense when he can't win a single thing. Starts a war over. Trump's war would be symbolic, not a major one. Can you accept it might be a fear of the president entering into virgin work for the purpose of attracting public diversion work require high scale talk about much more the hope would be to galvanize the public. Immigration thumbs counts in 2007. American people react over Trump immigration. 81% of voters supported allowing immigrants and 76% of whites without a college degree and 60% of Republicans. It splits Mr. Trump is down the middle. Marked it down the middle. Healthcare is a win. Both in 17. Trump is looking for a new plan. A do-away death and strategy leaves and raise prices for the insurance while Obamacare collapses under its own with that. Reminds people Republicans can blue health reform.
Can we note that?
Yeah, of course. I don't know how to use verbatim, so it's where like there
Just
are a
the
lot of
lost spaces.
enters.
That's fine.
I just did,
Awesome. All good for cross sex?
of course.
The incrementalism disadvantage, the AF is not multi-payer. Does the AF ban private insurance?
No, but the AF isn't a multi-payer private system that your evidence is about. Your evidence is about a system that prioritizes private insurance, which is different.
I guess my question is, so the government gives money to states. Can the states then just spend it on subsidizing private insurance agreements?
Yeah, the states could do like a vouchers plan.
Okay, and would any large amount of states do single payer?
I think some states would do single payer, yeah.
So
Like
a few of them, but
states
like,
that have looked towards single payer, like liberal states like California,
But like
New
red
York, those
ones
states would
probably
be more
wouldn't.
likely to do single payer.
but like Georgia, Texas, Yeehaw?
Probably wouldn't do single payer.
Okay,
But
that's
also
fair.
if they, yeah.
That's fair. The federalism advantage, how do states check Trump? Like examples?
So states could do things like they can continue to implement effective policies on what's called sanctuary cities. They can
Okay.
continue to pursue climate-based policies and so on. But legally, that type of resistance can't work when there is precedent for
Okay, so what
Commandeering.
what precedent exists now that stops them from doing like climate regulations?
preemption trends. So
So which
right now,
specifics?
Congress does not use conditional spending because conditional spending, didn't happen under ERISA, and also NFIB said that Congress would not use conditional spending.
You don't use conditional spending under anything?
Well, they're turning away from conditional spending because ERISA created this uncertainty. Like, I would've
What about, like,
didn't read
conditional
these
spending on,
cards
like,
until you see it,
anti-discrimination?
Because if you read this counterplan text to NC, I'll read it. But like, the reason why cooperative federalism is uncertain now is because when the courts rule on NFIB versus syllabus, they created a lot of uncertainty over conditional spending doctrine.
I have a question
which-
about the disease advantage.
Yeah, sure.
Walk me through how this gets to extinction. So disease starts in the United States, then what?
So a disease starts in the United States, and things like globalization means it spreads quickly. Antibiotic-resistant diseases are things that we can't react to quickly. We've read evidence that says that if we can't vaccinate against diseases in the United States, there's a high level of...
I guess my question is, like, what I'm trying to get to is when it goes to another country, why don't those patients just go to their doctors, or why don't they just get quarantined there?
Because at the point where a disease has spread in the U.S., the way that interdependence works is that it spreads too quickly for health systems to respond. Enough people go to
What if
enough
the disease starts in,
places.
like, India or China?
Well, I think that our scenario is more geared towards diseases that start in the U.S.
Why? Like, those countries
Because
are
the
also very
U.S. is a hub
interconnected.
for interdependent,
And
for
India and China are
interconnectedness.
not?
I mean, diseases could start in other places. The effort
Okay.
not solve those, it solves some that lead to extinction.
Okay, that's fine. The biotech scenario, what kind of biodefenses is the pharma industry developing now?
The biopharma industry would, if innovation policies worked and there was pharmaceutical price transparency,
Yeah.
develop defenses that could respond to capabilities like CRISPR is one example that our evidence cites. So different types
What's
of
the
drugs,
incentive
innovative
to do
life
this?
science policies.
What's the financial incentive to develop like a smallpox vaccine or something?
Money.
Why?
They
This
would
is like
get a
very
lot of money.
conditional profits.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, I think the policy is worse than phase two actually. So, it's like the policy is worse than phase two.
reasons to reject the team?
Just the picture.
Yeah.
About
2:45 remaining.
Okay. Order's gonna be Topicality, the Georgetown plan, the advantage counter plan, and then case under 1AC order.
So T courts advantage. What else?
Then the farm advantage, trust advantage.
Half the legitimacy, you don't want to repeat arguments.
Listen.
Okay. Is anybody not ready?
Our interpretation is national health insurance means the government must act as a payer of the insurance market. Thus, the immigrant evidence their interpretation is bad for debate because it justifies the proliferation of small affirmatives. There's a content education instead that limits explosion of forces. The negative rely on catch-all generics, which means we don't get in-depth education from case-specific strategies. They don't meet. The government doesn't provide insurance under the AF standards. Remember, the resolution says the United States federal government should provide national health insurance, which means that the government has to be the payer and the provider of the health insurance scheme, which is a reason that they don't meet their Dougherty counter-interpretation. Dougherty is also not qualified because he's a health ethic. Dougherty is also not qualified because he's a health ethics person. Over-limiting is better than under-limiting. Limits are a prerequisite to clash because the limited topic is key to the negative ability to have predictable pre-round preparation. Clash outweighs athletics because clash is intrinsic to the activity of debate. Anyone can read books about the topic, but only a limited topic facilitates the process of refining our arguments, which makes us better advocates. Our limited topic preserves innovation through advantage innovation and mechanism innovation. They can read the public option, get to single payer by expanding Medicare or expanding Medicaid. They can create a national health service, establish a constitutional right to health insurance, or read a different funding mechanism, or anything that the AF does that has the federal government do it, which means that they wouldn't be able to get out of the some of our offense. Their interpretation is uniquely bad for limits. It is linked to uniqueness. They justify any act that makes a minor change to Obamacare, which devolves into acts that just reimpose CSR subsidies and read advantages based on certainty, which is bad for negative ground because all dissents are thumbs by the original ACA. Visa point is potential abuse. They allow other acts that skirt, coordinate dissents like universal tax credits, increase subsidies, expand Medicare Advantage, or manage competition. Reasonability is a uniquely bad standard at the NDT because we can't go home to do more research for a broader topic. The sum of reasonable interpretations is too unlimited. It's too arbitrary and inconsistent to enforce a meaningful limit on the topic. Only competing interpretations provide the lens to view which team has the better vision for debate. Now go to the advantage counter plan. I think it solves enough of the case. It has the first point has the federal government redirect data mining operations towards disease monitoring. The Bamford evidence is that the NSA has surveillance capacity, which is sufficient to solve for things like early detection of diseases, which means that we are able to do things like respond and quarantine rapidly. The second plank creates grants the CDC permission to use a self-replenishing emergency disease relief fund, which is able to resolve response capacities in the case of an VR spread or a bioterror attack or a disease which solves for all of those, for all of their stuff. The last plank of the counterplan, which is to repeal the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion, is able to resolve all of the uniqueness claims for why cooperative federalism is being undermined now, which would solve for trust, which would solve for cooperation between the state and the federal government. Naturally, permutation to both still links to all of our DAs because all of our links are about the plan now go to the court's counterplan. Concede permutation is a test of competition. I'm not going for it. Courts counterplans are still good because they are key to testing the agent of the resolution, the pharma advantage. At the top, we are past peak pharma now. The Smith evidence says that there is no innovation or money left to develop drugs. Opioid crisis, thumbs Novak, and second inspector of drug companies gouge the public has put the entire industry under a cloud that's nothing compared to the opioid crisis controversy. It's very potent. Politically, the biggest impact on business is yet to come. Just the announcement of a Senate program to opioid makers and builders their prices down on the day to give you an idea how much the industry values advertising big pharma, spends more of that than on actual drug research and development. Trump used the emergency declaration to support states and cities suing companies, distributors, and drugstore exchanges to give these cases full weight and resources and increase the chances of a big settlement. And what many are comparing the drug company conduct on this issue in a way that is the way to big tobacco cover up nicotine companies paying $206 billion. The emergency declaration could be more harmful than price controls. The industry's practice of lobbying doctors could be curbed. There's no bioterror impact. Terrorist organizations wouldn't use it. They are conservative and invest in known weapons rather than ones that might not work. That's the Lensos evidence, who is an expert in biological terror studies. The U.S. won't retaliate Matashak and Tin. There are a number of reasons why the U.S. is not likely to use a nuclear weapon. If we're difficult for a list of appropriate targets to strike following a biological event, the non-proliferation benefits for restricting the role of strategic weapons to deter nuclear attacks outweigh the marginal reduction of the country's ability to use of biological weapons. The U.S. has efforts in place to defend against biological attacks. There's no risk of bioterror or PulseOc. And 15 recent research has led many to believe that the threat is largely overhyped. There would be plenty of chances to clamp down on an outbreak of bioterrorism was effective. More terrorist groups likely would have used pathogens. The absence of widespread bioterrorism helps to show the gap between current misconceptions and reality. The use of a pathogen as a biological agent depends on the group's ability to isolate a virulent strain, weaponize it, and distribute the potential biological agent. Also, as an individual reason why it would not make an effective weapon of terror. Trump decks pandemic containment and response. Walsh and 17 U.S. needs sustained funding for pandemic preparedness. Will Trump do that? Details are big. Trump's pledge to increase defense budget would have to be offset by slashing while some groups would be eliminated altogether. That's to foreign age would felt Trump has some doubts about how he would handle a crisis. He raised doubts about the safety of vaccines. We would make carefree in a world of a pandemic outbreak or a bioterror attack. That's the Peterson evidence. If their internal link is just if their internal link to resolving these things is just that we have to quarantine people, then the fact that A, that we have a surveillance counterpoint, which means we can detect them, and B, we would just make carefree means we are sufficient to solve the trust advantage. Other countries definitely thump. There's no way that the app is able to solve a pandemic that spreads in another country, and if they're right that it stops once it goes to a country that has trust in the government, then would stop once it goes to any country that has universal health care. Doctor-patient trust is super high. Patients rely on doctors for all sorts of information. Trust is high now, but changeable. Peckley at 70 patients trust their physicians, but it's eroded. U.S. trust of doctors 58% trust is high now. Lakin and 17 all agree doctors bring most trust. Or the doctors maintain their trust factor among Americans. There's no way that they are able to solve for trust. Their internal link is about litigation. I don't know how suing doctors or managed care organizations means that patients have more trust in their doctors or want to have the sorts of kinds of conversations that their app internal link evidence is about. Diseases don't cause extinction. There's no global dispersal. Humanity is quite large, which makes intervening actors likely. Pathogens can kill before spreading, which creates a selective pressure for pathogens not to be lethal. That's the Baird evidence. You should prefer evidence from existential risk scholars. Getting to extinction assumes a model of disease transfer that has literally never happened. Wendy and 50 prophets of doom have been telling us for decades that a pandemic is on its way. Hysteria goes on over MERS, flu in 2009 or in 2012 over fair flu, common warmed animal plague that sweep. The global scientists understand there are significant physical and evolutionary barriers to a virus developing airborne transmission. There will always be significant barriers preventing adaptation to humans. There are no recorded instances of viruses that have adapted to humans. Predictions of lethal pandemics have always been wrong. There are a bunch of alt causes: fear of getting bad news, low confidence in expertise, and embarrassment of self-health status. Tabor and 51/3 of participants provided responses demonstrated unfavorable evaluations of the process of seeking medical care. There were two major categories: interpersonal concerns and concerns about the quality of medical care, involved communication, concerns disliking the manner in which doctors provide advice, perceiving that doctors do not listen to patients, enormous trust of doctors, believe that doctors do not care about patients. The most frequent reason was that participants had low confidence in doctors' expertise. Some participants reported that anticipated fear, embarrassment, or guilt kept them from from seeking medical care for your needles, pain, and expected negative outcomes. Lack of transportation is an alternative causality to even seeing a doctor in the first place. Tabor and 15 barriers to medical care. The largest overarching category of avoidance may be having too little time or being too busy to seek medical care or clinical hours where you're convenient, having to take time off from work. That transportation was difficult, or that transportation was difficult, or the distance was too far. I'm also going to extend the link term here. The fact that the government is paying for the care means that patients are much less likely to trust their physician because it is going through a middleman that they distrust. If we win some of our politics link arguments that people don't like it when the government pays for healthcare, that functionally swamps out their ability to solve for this advantage, the federalism advantage. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The part that we read in the 1C about the NFIP versus Sebelius ruling probably takes it out because the court struck down the coercive mandates that their uniqueness evidence talks about. The ACA functionally resolved some forms of cooperative federalism because it included things like expanding Medicaid partnerships. The ACA was an incremental change to health policy that built upon previous state and federal cooperation. Bloc and 13 Congress proceeded as typically does, building on existing laws, incremental legislation over a backdrop of state control. The outcome kept from the Senate. The ACA is state empowering. The ACA creates the partnerships that maintain states' relevance. The Ryan evidence is a pretty good answer to the thesis of the Ryan evidence is a pretty good answer to the very thesis of this argument. It says that federalism policies in one area never spill over to other issues. So even if there is cooperative federalism in the context of healthcare, that doesn't mean that the states are doing the kinds of things that prevents Democratic backsliding or Trump lash out. There are also a ton of thumpers to cooperative federalism, such as Trump doing things like executive orders on sanctuary cities and forcing the states to do things like that.
We're going to take a second for the prep section. But can you just, I did the case and then for the counterclaim and the T argument, you can call it that. You can read what I wrote, you don't need to do anything else. Alright, cool. Alright. We got 6:55. Awesome. Okay, so I first want to talk about your T interp. So, can the states, under your interpretation, play any role in the implementation of a federal insurance plan?
No, our argument is that the federal government has to be the operator of the insurance plan.
Okay, so like an AF that reinstates the individual mandate, not topical.
That would not be topical.
How about an AF that adopts the Canada single-payer model?
That would not be topical.
Okay, so what single-payer model would be topical that has ever happened, ever?
One that is operated by the central government, which is
so
one
like
that's, advocated by
complete
socialization,
complete socialized insurance is the only version.
That's an example of a topical
what's another one?
interpretation for sure.
What's another one?
Public option.
There are also
Why is the public option topical?
Because
under the public option, you have the choice to buy into the public option, but other folks would still receive insurance that is not funded by the federal government.
The central government operates as the insurer.
Yeah, but it's not the only insurer. It's one of the insurers.
There's also a ton of funding mechanisms to get to the single-payer app.
Okay, so app innovation is funding mechanisms for single-payer. Like, what are those funding mechanisms? It has to be provided by the federal government. So, like, what are the different funding mechanisms that create innovation, advantage ground, whatever?
Yeah. There's you can fund the app with different forms of taxes. You can fund the app with deficit spending. There are different reimbursement models. You've read several different apps about
Medicare
this.
and Medicaid already exist. Those are government-run programs. Why is the status quo not topical?
Expanding those to everyone would be topical.
But you just said that a public option is topical under your interpretation, which is a public availability for only some people, not for
available
everyone.
to everyone. There's a universal distinction that hasn't been made early in the debate.
Yeah.
We want to read cards about that. We can.
Okay. I look forward to that in the 2 hours. So the advantage counter plan. how does the government know which biological agent to respond to if there is no insurance coverage or data on the people who are victims of a biological attack? What's the monitoring process?
Yeah, our argument is they would have data under the attack in a world where the NSA had surveillance data mining operations that were dedicated
But
towards
where does
figuring
the
it out.
health data come from if people aren't going to doctors or interacting with the health insurance system?
It comes from things like internet searches.
So like
As an example.
people searching WebMD, that's how we find out whether or not they're victims of a disease or a bioterror attack?
That is an example of the way that the NSA can use data
Okay.
data computing.
And how
to
does the
surveil
counterplan,
disease.
how does the counterplan create innovation for new response capabilities? Is there an internal link, is there a solvency argument for that?
Yeah, that's the argument that we just like give the CDC a bunch of money to create these things.
Can you kick counterplan planks to the 2NR?
Yeah, it's a new app.
Okay.
No conditional
Why does it?
conditionality argument.
Why does repealing the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion not link to the political capital DA or the
Our-
base DA, whichever
Our
one
links
you're
are
gonna extend?
predicated off of expanding
Seems
the Affordable
pretty
Care
fucking
Act. We've
controversial.
said that people don't like the ACA.
Alright. We're gonna do the bottom of the federalism advantage. The pretty fucking controversial advantage counterplan. The state's counterplan. The banking disad. The incrementalism disad. And the base disadvantage on the bottom. Yeah, I'll do that one more time.
Yeah.
Alright. Bottom of federalism, I'm gonna start.
Hang on, let me get to the one.
Oh yeah, you're fine, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm just gonna take a sip of.
We're making incremental progress. I had to have made some level of progress. All right, go ahead.
Alright, it'll be the bottom of the federalism advantage. I'm gonna start on the excess sanctuary stuff.
Okay.
Then the counterplan, advantage counterplan. The state's counterplan, politics thing, disadvantage, the banking one. Incrementalism disad, and the base disad on the bottom. Keep working me. Alright, is everyone all good?
Yes.
Awesome.
Trump 6 on sanctuary city sex federalism rule 17 with Trump action against sanctuary cities violence censorship powers. The 10th Amendment means that the fact may not commandeer state officials to enforce federal laws, terms, orders, and the federal coercion of states and undermining separation of powers. Brian, when finishing the right evidence, there's no spillover right in 12 countless real examples show that the state and federal authorities and ongoing pressure negotiation of the relationship between state and federal powers as departed from zero sum all causes to democracy. Trump is in Keysmith 12 Trump would not represent any win for democracy. The more pertinent issues remain in car corruption, voter apathy, anti-establishment sentiment, the electoral system and culture, or the U.S. is an oligarchy throughout removing Trump would be a superficial adjustment. Their cast of evidence, you should throw it out. It's from someone presenting to a non-governmental organization who loves democracy, and the conclusions like, thank you for letting me talk on this. Doesn't cite any fucking studies. The counterplan, I'm reading impact against ABR, no impact, ABR, Cox 17, already on the edge of a death super rug. We are most certainly not the end of the world, will surely won't be due to antibiotic resistance measures we can control. ACB, our tests are highly effective. Scientists are working tirelessly to think of innovative solutions. Apocalypse is the wrong word. Humankind will certainly won't be wiped out, even if the worst case scenario antibiotic resistance will affect 1% of the planet. There's a lot of funding into resistance. Go to the states counterplan. Go see the permutation is a test competition. 50 state fiat is a reason to direct the argument, not the team. Is that flexibility and it's new FD. Wag the dog. The banking reform disadvantage will concede no impact to technology because it's super vague and no political capital. This doesn't take out the base disadvantage because there's a difference between how the base perceives Trump passing a super unpopular policy and not passing anything. The incrementalism disadvantage. This is not a straight turn on this. This is not a straight turn on the disadvantage. We're not going to go for it. We'll concede that it's not going to pass in the status quo because it's super unpopular, which is bolstered our link arguments on the base disadvantage. Will also however did not answer the argument that burnout is inevitable in the status quo because of multi-payer systems within a lot of areas in the United States, especially in rural areas such as Georgia and Texas, that will not adopt single-payer plans even in the world of the affirmative. That means that since burnout's inevitable, that crushes rural hospitals, they conceded the Almond evidence that makes ag collapse inevitable, which means federalism can't solve it, and we have answers to their federalism arguments on case the wag the dog disadvantage outweighs the terms case the plan crushes Trump's popularity, forces conservatives backlash and abandon him. That's where subversion comes in, brings friendship with North Korea, restore popularity, goes nuclear. That's the kind of evidence they don't have an answer to nuclear escalation, draws in China, which outweighs the affirmative versus turns federalism causes unrestrained Trump in a time of war, also cracks on state rights in a world in which he
completely feels like he needs to because the poll numbers are dropping, turns diseases and bioterrorism because North Korea will bioattack us. The Czechs argument, the Bernstein evidence is from 2016. It doesn't assume new hawkish advisors like Bolton advisors don't check Trump last of 17 Trump is a free agent. Trump line said advisors to when he failed to reaffirm America's commitment to NATO. The president can act unilaterally with devastating consequences when it comes to protecting American military power. There are few, if any, constraints. It's clear that they have not been able to restrain him. They seem willing to endorse Trump's self-centered nationalism. The White House operates in a Darwinian dog-eat-dog world too. Moderates in the administration, McConnell and McMaster said as much in a recent op-ed. Also, there's no legal check on war with North Korea. Goes with 914 executives will decide for itself whether to attack unilaterally. Neither the people nor the other two branches can do much. Don't expect the law or lawyers to provide avenues to constrain the president from using force in North Korea. Other answers read on the last show itself will apply to this. The union is made Trump's approval rating at 50% and 80 to 90% for conservatives. That's uniquely key with the conservatives because that's what buoying his poll numbers. That's a Gallup poll evidence. Their evidence from January. You should throw it out. Trump's approval ratings is high among Republicans, which is uniquely key. Grassley and Harris 18 Republicans approval rating rose to 43%. Also sets up and also 4 points from January to government by gains among Republicans, white men, and independents. Trump obtains the support of most of the 46% who voted for him. He's massively popular with conservatives now. CPA PAC polling also answers immigration from Morganella. 24 Trump's answer under 93% approval rating from the largest gathering of conservatives of the Trump conservatives voice their overwhelming support for Trump, who drew a record number of attendees, 75% support Trump's current immigration proposal. The current conservative movement has found a new leader, veteran pollster. McLaughlin told the resiliency argument there aren't that many people that are unshakably loyal to Trump, even if his super low base sticks with him. Most of his supporters are general conservatives that would backlash to the plan because they see it as a massive tax hike and would see it as completely of a massive expansion, but it's way worse than Obamacare. Their cards may sound much more powerful, but they're not about how the actual most conservatives will respond. Most of his supporters like him only because of policies like tax reform. They plan reverses that was like 17 Trump's first major accomplishment has ushered in reevaluation. Conservative media hypes are warming to him. In addition to taxes, he has presented over slashing regulations, repealing individual mandate measure in terms of what Republican voters want. He's winning. We should discount what it means for Trump. Much alike to the support of his base money in their pockets. Who can prove Trump's views of Trump's handling of the economy. Magnitude is uniquely key. Repeal and replaces the core promise. The average repeal in the worst kind of possible place for the base because it's a massive increase in taxes and basically socialized medicine. The lashing argument, yes, he lashes out against North Korea. Evidence cites international affairs scholars. Their evidence is political pundits. Another political crisis does cost him the first strike. North Korea institutional checks fail. Rockman 17. Trump is flirting with a preemptive strike on North Korea. The crisis Trump is stroking and is increasingly inseparable from domestic problems. The anger, the danger is that multiple crises will merge, tempting the Nevada president to try to exploit international conflict to break out of basic domestic difficulties. Government facing a domestic crisis are often more inclined to adventurism abroad. Those who are hoping that America's deep state will contain Mr. Trump are probably guilty of wishful thinking. Also, the magnitude is uniquely key. He would experience a massive drop within his poll numbers, which means things like yelling at football players for kneeling or doing a small diversion is not enough to boost it, which means North Korea is the only thing that can actually get him back up. The immigration number argument, their evidence is about the broad population. It says Democrats hate him. Obviously, they're pulling against him now. That's not key argument. It says the base is uniquely key, and conservatives because they support his broad immigration standing. That was the uniqueness evidence right above. Also, we have empirics. When he tried to do things like move against his immigration promises, they backlashed heavily, and he backed off it. This also answers their resiliency argument. Peter 17, Trump gave whether an attack from some of the strongest supporters who were outraged about his decision to fight over the border wall as part of a deal with the Democrats. No promises were central. No constituency was more passionate than the conservatives come down in combination with swift came from many different conservative corners. They did seem to reinforce how long the leash supporters have granted him as being reined in. The link debate. The plan is super unpopular, not a drop in the bucket. Over 90% hate Obamacare. Evidence cites Harvard polls, which is way better. It goes through every single part of his base. Their evidence is theoretical and doesn't cite any polls. The link turns are naive. It is 10 times worse than Obamacare. Dodge 17 on the surface single payer tends to be unpopular, but when you go into the details, the support collapses more than 1/3 of single payer actors are changing their minds after hearing arguments from opponents. Skeptics are put off by practical disruption. I think the existential uproar from the health insurance industry had been displaced by a big government. The battle wage for Obamacare will be replayed tenfold in any effort to enact single payer. The app would be a massive increase in taxes to fund everyone's fucking shit. There's no way their evidence talks about why this is popular with the people who hate the state. It's too radical to drop fair. 17 Republicans has been several years hearing Obamacare wanted to remain mired in negative approval ratings. All Medicare for all would involve stripping hundreds of millions of people from their existing private insurance coverage. A significant percentage of the public is likely to react vehemently. Marked vehemently.
We have 6:55. Are you good on cards, or do you need anything else? Can you turn the page?
I want to get
Yeah, can you, I'll use all the
I said certain. Oh, okay.
I just resynced one of your round 7. First, can we go to the... Okay, just close your doc.
I don't want to be.
Oh, I see. And just grab the stuff for the incrementalism chart that I'm going to have you extend. And then can you read the final thing? I want it before, right after the meeting support here. Okay. And then the other thing is near the farming range and at the top, first thing. That they can see that they can manage from the innovation here. Extend those your innovation festival. So that's 20 years. Because it's just okay, we'll just drop the countersign to the mother there, but we'll just choose like minutes. Go up. You don't need to first. Yeah. Because then this should be fast. You good? We have 3:33.
All right.
No, you're totally
But the only solution I found to it is by not going back until there's 4 hours before it came. It'll be stuff up to that. Oh, I don't, I'm way past shame. Do you ever know shame? It's like a passing maybe? Well, that's what that one was, somebody's being burned out of the fire. Set up for a real comic. Yeah. You could actually get up and hit yourself with the chair, which if you were one of these college kids, I would be totally cool with. I know. I've grown as I went over and become altruistic. It's turning me away. Had it been you, Eli, I would have let it run. See how that's funny that.
All right. Is everyone good for an order?
Yes.
It'll be the pharma advantage, the disease/trust advantage, and the federalism advantage, followed by the incrementalism DA, topicality, the advantage counterplan, and the base DA.
you go.
Whenever you are.
They can see the disadvantage, turns their innovation scenario, extend their Taylor evidence, innovation solves where the turns their PBs their friends, long-term lash out, we're not past peak normal, continue innovation is possible by taking out PBMs as the middleman, which encourages innovation, shifting business model, doesn't mean collapses inevitable roadwork, and 17 traditional pharmaceutical business may become obsolete, the pharmaceutical companies working on major shift, outsourcing companies rethink, where they play, we see new link built to working on pharmaceutic genetics, immunotherapy, and increasing number of firms operating and integrating technology with this shift in the business model, and refocusing on the field of linking, how adaptive disruption, future predictive evidence, how Stephen 18 we maintain, and optimism, the future of drug development as emerging technologies are applied across R&D that impact our process efficiency and success rates, the full potential of the technology will build vibrant and sustainable biopharma industry, bioterror causes extinction, weaponization of pathogens, circumvents their defense, and guarantees U.S. retaliation and causes global war, and global trying, and turns all their impacts. Only effective innovation in life sciences industry generates sufficient defense mechanisms to deter attacks and prevent response mechanisms. Extinction revolved 30 molecular biology, made enormous advances in checkpoint field, terms of how the U.S. to fight things advancing so rapidly, in terms of keep track of all the keep track of all threats and here I can kill a large part of humanity and in the future someone may create organic that can drive the human race to extinction. Sciences lethality and cause access to lethal agent will be available to end with all background. Biology here includes the trust advantage. We're not going for. We can see there are tons of all causes to trust right now. Diseases from biotech still disease that's intentional, which none of their defense is assuming. Plus, it's saying from ABR, the federalism is advantage. They are a democratic backsliding comes extinction, maintaining the rule of law, and creating legitimacy. The democratic model is necessary to check the worst impacts of the crop. Preemption by the federal government destroys limitation on the federal government, which destroys the legitimacy of the American model. They don't have impact defense. The ACA didn't expand federalism because it ended federal preemption. The accurate sense of the federalism narrative back in 17 states are big. The leader from written states different democratic terrorism, political culture, existing practice, appetites and services, national arguments in favor of a national solution. Political risk and desire for health reform, federal action is not needed for solving the waste of the bottom. States and pushing the cost of states are not afflicted with political pathology and vice versa. Allocate for responsibility. The states and the federal government, the states should retain control for regulation while passing the government responsibility for money. ACA properly using control of the money, but also rest out more regulatory authority from states and ever elimination on federal system. We may say elimination on federal system combined with retention of substantial obstacles to state action. Under all causes assume the affirmative, which is able to overcome them. Plus other evidence also proves that the states are working out. Incrementally. Or when I see disease evidence, answers burnout when happening with new disease, and they expect too fast, so we can't respond with new vaccines. But they can see the two turns. One, cooperative federalism is key to agriculture. It creates better models that fixes farm practice and provides rural economies that are stronger internally to long-term growth. Two, the athletes to effective federal models. Their internal link is full coverage, which only the athletes do. Plus, proves that we solve the ag model and we create full insurance. They can't get out of the DA role. T. We certainly meet their interpretation. It says NHI implies an active role for the government rather than subsidizing private arrangements. Governments create public insurance. If our act doesn't meet, no act does. Our 2EC evidence explains what the Canadian system was operated, which includes cooperation with localities. That's a single-payer system, which also turns their topic education arguments. Because if the Canadian system isn't topical, nothing is. Prefer counter-interpretation, universal basic coverage, and operating in part by the federal government. That solves their limits arguments because the federal government still has to fund the app, which doesn't allow minor changes because that forces major market changes. But universal and comprehensive health here doesn't. It can't serve core DAs because it has to cover the whole market. Their interpretation is contracted, doesn't make any sense. The status quo is topical because Medicare is a payer. That was cross-like, and that benefit is app innovation that turns education and makes us better researchers, which is the only skill that matters in debate reasonability. If we didn't make debate impossible, don't one day. The counterplay. They don't solve federalism because they don't create a model that has the evidence inside their own case. They don't solve pharma because they don't change the rights and develop drugs necessary to solve a pandemic, which means the response is too way too late. Permutation do both solves the reason the counterplan is better. Linked to the DA because repealing Medicaid would be super unpopular. Taking place to the 2 hours of voting issue. It rules the one air destroys a definite debate. Health system are key. Document 78 VW agent. Maybe yours is no vaccine or social activities in 78. But defense preparedness is proper prioritization of validated threats. Allocation of for research of adverse and defense maybe is offensive weapon development. Weapons development. The DA. Turns case presumes winning the whole DA. It doesn't turn pharma because there's no unique for innovation collapse. There's no drawing. They don't have evidence for drawing. There's no evidence for no bioterror plus or scenarios. China terrorists getting bioweapons. It doesn't turn democracy because it doesn't affect broader models. There's no lash out, no rational assumption of the first strike in another country. If random voters stop disliking him, advisors of top officials will constrain his reaction, refuse to carry out orders, won't wag the dog to Maskey. 17 to 1 will rally him in an obvious wagging dog situation. I would generally carry out orders even on 1998. But laughing little when he ordered bombing raid on Iraq, depending on breast, I would never ever approve. If he filter acting this guy, say political skin, he can't launch a new seat in the lottery. We came 17 constructed on the president already exists and war in North Korea. Require authority from Congress. Trump cannot sort of war on his own policy provides that nuclear weapons will only be used in extreme circumstances. The president cannot order on a whim. Their evidence is clickbait. Sullenberg is 17. Trump will also nuclear striking against North Korea despite irresponsible outcomes. Journalism. Why do you choose to believe that? Our very top military brass would actually carry out the orders from the war person ability launch to strike is an absolute. Our military won't do this just because Trump says do this in the fear that Trump will have a breakdown. No possible world does anyone involved in other than order millions of people. Order millions of people be killed for no reason. All Trump, terminating a lot of health launch, and everyone who held football, which tells it we're on legal grounds. There's no planning for a bloody nose strike. If you try, Trump doesn't have a bloody nose strike against North Korea, I can further constantly administration and concerning bloody nose military attack. There's zero. Their uniqueness card prove that there's zero link. Trump has done so many things his base disagrees with, including making a budget deal with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and promising to talk to North Korea. Yet Georgia's Gallup evidence says 90% of his base still loves them. It's impossible to additional leisure. Their evidence proves that there's zero chance the plan takes it all the way to 90% to unpopular. Plus, the plan would be popular because it's states' rights and all of their evidence is about states. They don't have evidence about it. Our app is Brian care because it devolves all authority to states. Our want to see evidence says that we do repeal and replace based on predominantly evangelical supporters locking everybody. 3 times Trump based on predominantly evangelical based on the number of evangelicals striking out with concerning fighting Trump. Whereas I affirm the point of Trump, they don't care about the access policy, but women charging his right to harassment of evangelicals start saying we've had enough of this and we're resident UBC and getting reelected so long as Trump feels the bigotry and his base no support of Bush. At 111 is the core of his political field who is to his body based on Trump of the presidency, not despite of xenophobia and racism because of the recent immigration politically that's not one the transformation of American politics. White voters shifted and managed I can't let Trump had an opening and that's exactly what happened. It's the xenophobia and racism the defining part of Trump's war. Racism was incredibly powerful, predictive market card, predictive healthcare is not seen as all 17 Republican voters, including a strong conservative, are willing to shift to left. If that's the direction Trump's moving Republican voters, those most willing to address the persistent offer from Republican Trump loyalists, Republican Party identification is more tribal affiliation and ideological quit.
Alright, what was the last card?
It's the last card of the doc.
Okay.
And the Bolshevik evidence was marked at suggests that xenophobia and racism.
Alright. Perfect.
Yeah, whatever. Tail wagging dogs, whatever it says. I don't understand why you're talking about CDA this way. Like, nothing. I'm just being weird. Maybe they like to have this.
That was from one of my friend's dads. Like when he was younger, he worked on someone named David Bradstreet's campaign in like the 70s.
I have heard that story like 75 times.
People keep asking. It's not my fault. Zakiya made fun of me for it. Gaz made fun of me for it.
I'm not making fun of you, I was just asking, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying you were. It was more Zakiya.
Oh, dudes.
We'll check the rest of this.
Johnny, it'll do, it's fine.
Okay. Order is going to be the basis ad. The advantage counterplan, incrementalism disad, firm advantage, federalism advantage.
Base, advantage counterplan, incrementalism.
One more time, all the way through.
Yeah, the base disad, the advantage counterplan, the incrementalism disad, the pharma advantage, and then the federalism advantage. Okay. Anybody not ready? Awesome.
The right, the dark disad outweighs North Korea war goes nuclear, draws in great powers like Russia and China due to geographic proximity and strategic interest. That's accountable evidence that causes extinction via nuclear winter. It's the fastest and most probable scenario. Trump lash out. What happened faster than their speculative internal links in the economy or any of the coverage impacts of turns. Federalism because unrestrained. Trump would crack down on states' rights at turns. Disease and bioterror because North Korea would respond with a bioterror attack. Yes, Trump would lash out. The Miller evidence says that advisors don't check because military officials are trained to obey orders from the commander-in-chief. The Goldsmith evidence says that there isn't any legal check or ramifications on Trump. Literally, no one can check Hoffman in 16 how much power president had. Nuclear weapons appear to be limitless. That power fuck the Constitution, the president's authority over nuclear decision-making. Challenges not even the Secretary of Defense who refuses to disobey a president's order to direct fire. Temperament translate to an itchy finger. This isn't clickbait, Nif. It is. Trump loves clickbait. He's unstable and egotistical and would do anything to restore base popularity. Diversionary conflict is likely attempting Trump could regain public standing through the rally around the flag effect that usually occurs following the outset of a war. Trump's authoritarian tendencies make the prospect of rebuilding his legitimacy on the basis of security especially dangerous. Chaotic Shelter's path to administration led by a novice commander-in-chief who has alienated American allies deserve no benefit of the doubt. Trump will attack North Korea to bolster his popularity. Torpy attempting given obstacles on the domestic front. The need to win big. Trump may look to score victories on the international scene. This may go in a very bad direction, putting the North Korean threat to the rest may look to Trump like an appealing prize. The app is not Ryan Care. It's super unpopular because it expands government health care. Things like Obamacare. It's unpopular because it would raise taxes in order for the government to give money to the states to provide health insurance. Are one of the evidence from the one of the cites Harvard polls, which are way better than any other leak defense evidence. The link terms are naive. They clarified in cross-checks that some states would implement something like single payer, which causes 10 times more backlash than Obamacare, and is way too radical. The thumper debate. Global uniqueness is negative. His approval ratings amongst Republicans is higher than ever. Our evidence is super recent. It cites major conservative network polls. That's the Krasny and Morginello evidence, but it is all because he supports conservative policies. His base doesn't care that he says stupid shit. Magnitude is key. The F is a huge hike in taxes that replaces Obamacare with Obamacare on steroids. People can't forget about that. There aren't that many people that are unshakably loyal to Trump, even if his super loyal base sticks with him. Most of his supporters are general conservatives that would backlash to the plan. They will like him only because of his policies. The app would reverse huge conservative policies like tax reform and replace them with Bernie Sanders' plan, which would crush his resilience with the base. The Blake evidence. We have empirics that disprove resiliency on core issues. DACA demonstrates that flip-flopping on key promises matter. His base freaked out last fall when Trump talked about a deal and immediately backpedaled because his base backlashed. All of our link arguments disprove the Edsel evidence that healthcare isn't key. It's key. It's key. Both our uniqueness arguments should frame this. Conservatives are supporting Trump now because he's doing conservative policies and things like tax reform, whereas the app is a massive tax hike. The advantage counterplan concede the permutation is a test of competition. We're not going for it, but ADRs have no impact. One, the disease defense and the burnout stuff all answers this, but there's also no impact
impact to ABR specifically, the worst case scenario is that it would only impact 1% of the population. That was the Cox evidence, the incrementalism dissad. We didn't kick out of it wrong. There's no way that the turn is able to overcome the original internal link to the dissad. There would still be multi-payer systems because conservative states wouldn't implement single payer. That is what drives doctor burnout. They've conceded that burnout leads to shortages and people leaving rural communities, which means that there's no way that there's sustainable ag production in a world of the affirmative. Now the pharma advantage, innovation doesn't matter. They read deep into it. The scenario is nebulous. Also, the dissad probably turns it because war would mean that there wouldn't be any capital that goes into innovation. There would be capital that goes into only war. Spill up to innovation would be long-term. Our impact is necessarily faster. They also don't solve military tech innovation, which is what that impact is about. The only way they would get to any sort of impact. Innovation is terminally thumped. The Smith evidence says that there is no capital in pharma companies to do things like research and development, which means even if they solve some of their internal links, there's no way that they spill up to the kinds of drugs that would solve a bioterror attack. The Novak evidence says that the current opioid crisis is causing a crisis in capital amongst pharma companies, which means that they're not going to be developing the kinds of response measures to a bioterror attack. The Linsos evidence says that there's no way a bioterror attack would happen. Terrorists are super conservative and invest in only known weapons rather than ones that might not work. You should prefer it because he's an expert in biological terror studies. The Kolasek evidence says that bioterrorism is impossible because you can't make it virulent enough to safely distribute it in order to actually escalate to extinction.
So all the stuff on the disease advantage about how when it spreads to another country gets quarantined and solved
all the stuff on the disease advantage about how when it expands to another country that has trust in the government and a single payer system, it stops and gets quarantined is proof that a bioterror attack wouldn't spread enough to escalate to extinction, and the dissad outweighs the federalism dissad. The 1AR didn't answer our alternative causalities to federalism. Don't let the 2AR come back here and answer it. The will evidence says that Trump's executive order on sanctuary cities terminally decks federalism. The Ryan evidence says that there's no way that issue areas within federalism spill over. So even if they solve federalism within healthcare, they don't solve federalism writ large. They don't solve democratic backsliding. There are a ton of alternate causalities, like the things that Trump is doing in the status quo. The app doesn't have a way to stop Trump from doing bad shit or solve for any check on Trump. There's voter apathy, anti-establishment sentiment, and the electoral system and the culture war and political polarization in the United States. Ending federal preemption is net good for federalism. The ACA solves federalism because it creates partnerships amongst the states and the federal governments to do things like Medicaid expansion.
Also, just how California is still doing emission regulations. They're still rejecting Trump. They have no jurisprudence.
Liberal states are still rejecting Trump. They would do that post-app. Conservative states like Trump, they would do that post-app. App doesn't change it.
I believe we have 340.
I was 333.
Okay, you're right. It was 3 threes. You're right.
Now, I'm going to put the standard here.
incrementalism, DA? If I can find it. Yeah. Federalism? Base. All right. Are we all set? Excellent. Biowar outweighs the DA. It's the only impact with a certain internal link that is dependent on predictable things like markets as opposed to Trump just being a fucking moron. We have two internal links that they do not have adequate responses to. First is that insurance is the only way that we can adequately respond to attacks. Yes, it's about the ability of diseases to spread, but also about short-term retaliation. Our 1AC evidence speaks to the way that one bioterrorist attack makes war more likely because the U.S. lashes out at other countries and it creates an unpredictable international sphere rife for miscalculation. Second is that pharma innovation is crucial. Even if they have specific thumpers, our long-term predictive uniqueness should make you confident that improving transparency at least increases the possibility that we find drugs that are necessary to prevent the catastrophic consequences of an attack. That goes nuclear, draws in great powers, makes war with North Korea way more likely because of the unpredictable way in which the U.S. conducts itself internationally, but it's much more certain because it's something that every country is affected by, and their internal link, again, is dependent on Trump. Their spill-up link to it doesn't make any sense. They don't have an argument why the AF can't create long-term innovation because we read a piece of evidence in the 1AC that says that CRISPR is key to biodefense. The Austenberg evidence says it creates different regulatory capabilities that increases the risk of creating gene drives that can respond to military threats. Their Taylor evidence that they read in the politics DA says that tech capabilities influence the balance of power between states, i.e. the AF is a great internal link to increasing U.S. military power abroad, which deters all conflict and is a greater predictor for whether or not war breaks out, which answers their you don't solve military tech arguments. Even if pharma capital is imperfect, our model says that pharma is adapting now. Our Rauschenberg evidence says that pharmaceutical companies have made major shifts in responses to imperfect capital adoption to create different types of genes in immunotherapy with an increasing number of firms doing different types of adaptations. Opioids create imperfect profits, but our evidence post-dates and says that in the future, pharma has an optimistic viewpoint because there are emerging technologies that can be applied across R&D. Opioids is just uniqueness for us and demonstrates the pharma industry needs a boom like universal insurance. Biotech attacks will happen. We have three pieces of internal link evidence that say that it is likely because they can steal the weapons. It's especially true when the U.S. doesn't have the capabilities or any sort of regulatory measures, i.e. comprehensive insurance, by which they can collect the data in response to the attack. Our evidence says that they're virulent enough because they have the ability to change the science, innovate the diseases, and so on. They can also steal from countries like China, which is in our 1AC Rauschenberg evidence. Other countries can't lead to quarantines if the U.S. lashes out, and our evidence says that the disease spreads so fast that we don't have the capability to respond to the offensive weapons. Now, the other thing I'm going to go for is the incrementalism DA because they've messed this up. Here's the thing. I don't think we solve 100% of agriculture as is outlined in their evidence. However, the reason administrative complexity and burnout is an issue is because there is a lack of emphasis on primary care. Here's the line in their card. As long as healthcare remains a commodity preserved for those who afford it, physicians will burn out. As long as individuals are forced to forego medications to pay their rent, hospitals and physicians will be overwhelmed by sick patients, i.e. even if the AF doesn't lead to full total single payer, it still means there's healthcare coverage by which physicians aren't dealing with these types of problems where people can't afford insurance, which proves that it at least increases the way that agriculture operates in rural areas, and we have uniqueness arguments why state experimentation fails absent the AF, which proves it's the only possibility for improving rural hospitals. Their all-main evidence is that talent shortages are what make rural health organizations hard to solve, and the AF creates comprehensive insurance coverage, which at least means that more people go to those industries. They write the ad collapse impact for us, which means if you think there's a risk, we solve it. It's guaranteed extinction that only the AF accesses. The federalism thing, I'm not going for it. I'll concede there's some spillover to other issues. Nothing about the DA turns the case. Even if they're right that they create short-term lash out, they don't have evidence that it escalates to long-term nuclear use, and they can't affect long-term innovation because that's dictated by pharma companies. They don't have evidence that North Korea would use a bioterrorist attack, and it doesn't affect the overall dispersion of technology, which is what all of our impact evidence is about. They're in a double bind with all of these new impact cards because they say that Trump is inherently erratic. Their 2 Chait evidence says that when his approval ratings dropped 22% since January, that created a massive risk of lash out. Their 2 Trophy evidence says that there are issues with his meetings with Xi in North Korea that created danger that he'll have a crazy response because Trump's a fucking idiot. But there's not an internal link about the app that connects it to the threshold where he'll actually lash out. Plus he won't because 1, advisors and top officials constrain him. 2, Bernstein evidence indicates that they'll create fake victories which distract Trump and turn him off message. He has the attention span of a 2-year-old, so he'd either tweet about it or Congress would just give him another tax credit. 2, his wagging the dog doesn't build popular support. Why the fuck do we call this the wag the dog DA? It's so stupid. Trump Trump knows that first striking is the way to build support because their evidence says he needs policy legislation to drive it up. The Pentagon would never support rational action. Third is war requires congressional authorization. Conventional strikes have to be authorized by Congress before they're carried out, which is more likely than first use nukes, and you can't order nukes in a win because they're institutional constraints. You should be highly skeptical of every piece of evidence they've read because they're all just Trump fatalism that he's totally irrational. If the other dips in popularity, like cooperating with Pelosi or saying dumb shit and having triggered link, there's no reason the plan would cause lash out. If Trump gets tied to the plan, he would obviously take credit for it by claiming that it's something like Ryan here, which is how our entire 1AC describes the F. The reason that you should be skeptical of the link is because the way they consistently describe it is implementation of an entire single-payer system or something like Obamacare or Bernie-Care, which is just not what the F does. And because none of their link evidence that say that this drop support with the base is sufficient to connect that drop in support as a result of healthcare policy, which by the way isn't the F, to what finally makes Trump do this catastrophic impact that we've been talking about since day one on the climate topic, means you should be inherently skeptical, especially in light of all of our thumpers. The base is primarily evangelical. All of these different sexual allegations prove that they'll always be loyal to Trump because he cares so much about the fact that he is a Republican. They didn't care about the Access Hollywood tape. They didn't care about the fact that there is literally one of his prostitutes tweeting about how they had an affair. The Bujab evidence says that as long as Trump is able to maintain bigotry in his base, that's sufficient to support him. That's the key factor to Trump constituencies maintaining enough popularity to prevent lash out. Another reason that you should read all of these thumpers with skepticism, plus the link evidence, is because they don't have cards about the exact percentage that his support has to drop. But we've read evidence that his support has dropped since their impact cards were written. Last is our first up evidence which says that the tax bill was perceived as a pro-democratic cohesive agenda item, which also pissed off his base.
excellent debate, model debate. The decision is a 3-0 for the affirmative. I'll gladly go first. Let's see, I would like to say that I thought this was just a flat-out model debate. The depth of argumentation versus a new plan with some different stuff going on by Georgia was commendable and excellent. It's exactly what your coaches want to see you do against a new case. The adaptation of argumentation developed on both sides through all the times, and most importantly for me, the communication was clearly a priority for all of you, and it was crystal clear. You all made my hand cramp up because I wanted to write down everything that you were saying. So kudos to you. To the debate specific, I think the 2AR does an excellent job of debating within the mindset of the negative arguments. I think the 2AR carved out small to medium advantages in the areas of pharma, of taking your arguments and kind of an even if, without even having to say that, of debating where, given your arguments, the affirmative can still carve out some benefits to it. On the pharma advantage, I thought they had carved out some probability of solvency by giving a new area and new mechanisms of transparency that allow the pharma industry to develop some new drugs and perhaps rebound from the problems that they're having right now. Georgia does an excellent job on those, so I do think that becomes a small advantage. And there's some risk of impact because we can't always predict, but the negatives, evidence and argumentation on the bioweapons, they don't like to use those things and they're unpredictable, I think reduces some of the risk of the impact, leaving that as a fairly small on the small side of a small to medium advantage. I do think they get a little bit more on the incrementalism disad because I think they save some of those areas of it by doing it in states where they may result in single payer. We have that discussion where it's patchwork in Texas no, Georgia no, Cal yes, maybe more arguments about in the places where ag is key, they wouldn't be doing it. Talk about Kansas, talk about Iowa, things like that. But I think they get a decent amount with the absence of that argument, that they get a pretty decent decreased risk of what is conceded as an inevitable impact, right? Everybody agrees that it's a big flipping deal. So I think that's at least a medium advantage. Perhaps it's on the fat side of medium for the affirmative. The disad, I got 5 things that I think significantly undercut the disad. First is the link question. You're reading mostly single-payer link evidence, which kind of lacks a general story tying to it, with the exception of the taxes and the government involvement in it. But a lot of that story is kind of based, the government involvement is based on the single-payer part, and you don't really do a great job of a spin of why the plan would look that way to those conservative and Republican voters. I think the affirmative story on that we are the repeal and replace is as good a story as the taxes argument, and at least when it's a mixed message and we're talking about convincing the base, then I have to look into what is the nature of that base, how significant and how likely are they to react to something, and which side are they going to choose. So I think that argument at least decreases the numbers of people that flee from their support of Trump. The second is the threshold to the lash out versus North Korea. How many people have to go? How much support has to be lost? Those are arguments that don't really get made tangible, and I'm not sure that you necessarily could. It may be an inherent part of the argument. I don't consider this a lacking on your debating. I think it an inherent difficulty with this particular type of argument. So there's a little bit problem for me of establishing a probability on the size of the link triggering a mass lash out. And it's got to be a fairly significant given some of the arguments that will come. The third argument is the resiliency that his base has let him come back and allowed him to come back into their good graces on a variety of issues, and that some of his support from evangelicals is so hardcore that he'll never lose it. That all cuts into the question of the size of the link, and I already have the question on how much of that link would be necessary to trigger the disad. The fourth is the question of advisors. While there is no legalistic check, I think Natalie does a phenomenal job of talking about how they will manipulate Trump because he's so unpredictable into doing smaller things, and so they don't have to tell him, no, you can't do that. They just make suggestions that allows him to do something else, to tweet, to lash out in a different way. They mold and manipulate him as a different way of checking him, so he may not even know that he's being checked, or he won't be like, yeah, I have that authority to do it, because they're like, we know you have the authority to do it, sir. We just think that perhaps we could solve it in some different way to get the popularity base back. The fifth with is an argument that I just flat out love. The empirics of the dips post your impact evidence of the different times that he has bounced back, linking in with the resiliency argument, that he's had lots of potential opportunities to lash out because of declining popularity, and the problem, the way I see this as having a big kind of impact on the dis-ad is that you don't really deal with that as a comparison to the size of a link, why this dip would be uniquely bad, and why it would be so much larger than when he had to back off on immigration, when he had to do other things, and not as a whole takeout, but that one does raise the question of, how much of his unpredictability is something that we just are going to have to live with, and versus how much more unpredictability do we have to live with in the world of the affirmative plan, and I have a hard time distinguishing a significant difference. So I just think that the certainty of those advantages, the small one and the medium to large one, is more than enough to overcome a possibility or a probability that I don't know how to compare to the overall status quo. So that's it.
I'll go next. I think I don't disagree with any of that was said. It's big advantage, big risk of the ag turn, small advantage, smaller DA. I didn't evaluate too much of the ag stuff very differently. I agree with the arguments about maybe coverage not being resolved in a world of the AFS mechanism, but most of the link turn stuff I think sides in the AF column. It's a try or die impact scenario. I think in addition to just like diversifying some of the defense takeouts to this turn, I think also just some, you obviously can't like take out your own impact, but having some kind of impact assessment for the possibility they'll win that. But I do think that's the biggest thing for me that puts y'all in a pretty difficult spot. On the advantage, I think that there's a pretty big risk of just general defense regarding whether or not terrorists will attack, the hurdle associated with that, their motivations. There's some I think the AF has a pretty good story on answering most of the nuts and bolts of that. I think the lack of the 2NR having any retail defense is somewhat problematic. Is that some of the good arguments you had about quarantines in other countries ended up not mattering as much. I think just having that alive would have been pretty helpful. I think, most of the arguments as to why the app would resolve innovation through transparency and better competition in the market, I think deals with a lot of your general presses about the long-term prospects and whether we bottomed out. I do think it'd be good to have a little bit of just risk assessment, in lieu of the combination of arguments you have, a little bit of assessment of, look, there's not really a clear scenario for attack, what kind of new novel drugs will we need, how long does that innovation take, and I think painting a story for just really how much of a difference is the app going to make in the future bioterror pandemic, and being able to emphasize, I think, the quickness of the scenario in addition to the trigger for the link. So on the disad, I kind of like the 5 parts that were already mentioned. I think that some other things I'll say is, I think my general issue with this DA, that's not a critique of the way y'all are debating it, but it's kind of associated with my evaluation of these arguments, is y'all are winning a really high risk if there's probably some backlash in opposition to the plan. I think there's less of some quantification of how much of a dip in his approval or which pockets of the base would break off, causing him to get angry. I think I'm actually assigning a little bit more risk of just the base would be responsive and upset because of I think y'all are winning the spin on big government expansion and tax increases. I just think in combination with Trump being able to sell it, all the alt causes, resiliency, double bind for here other specific pockets of the base that wouldn't be as responsive. They're immigrants and bigots. They don't care about all the other horrible things he's done. So I think they're likely to have some response to the plan. It's just unclear if that backlash would be significant enough to plummet and trigger the scenario that y'all have isolated. And I think I'm in agreement on the empirical questions of the ebb and flow of previous policies and the reactions they've triggered. So I think a little bit more link assessment of, I think the core issue for supporters' arguments, even the 1AR examples, I think being able to get in front of those a little bit. And I think even just some kind of, look, we all know Trump is a loose cannon cop with nothing to lose, so we shouldn't roll the dice. Not a linear disad, but literally, if we win that there's a pretty significant risk of a short-term dip, then we just shouldn't even take that chance and possibility. And I think having that assessment in combination with the stuff I already said about the advantage. I think a little bit more terminal impact mitigation. you know, there's not like a silver bullet card from you all that I'm sure y'all have like in your box and just like escalation and draw. And I think the one card y'all have in agreement with the AF doesn't really get to a lot of the arguments y'all are wanting to activate. And I think other things about the general mitigation for the impact level is general check. I think their cards are a little bit better on can't haul off and nuke a country. There would be like a declaration of war and other procedural checks. Probably a little bit better for the neg on advisors aren't going to check because, I mean, he's just surrounded by crazy at this point. Let's see. I think that's probably mostly what I have. I have a few other little things for the AF too, but that's mostly what I have in the assessment of the debate.
I don't have a ton to add. Basically no risk of the AF's advantage of the 1AC. I thought you all were great there. I thought your uniqueness evidence was more than sufficient. Extremely high risk of the straight turn to the incrementalism DA, and me some risk of the base DA. I think the two things that Georgetown did poorly, and because you've just been praised by these two, that I like kind of thought that maybe made it higher risk for me. Like 2NR was so much about taxes. And your EV on that is not great. It's like kind of mentioned in passing with like healthcare and DREG and stuff, but I don't think the 2R really answered it. And then 2NR was great on like all of these prior dips were immediately backtracked, like, and that kind of explains why it hasn't been a sustained dip in popularity. I thought that Georgetown was like not as good on that question, but I agree totally with Judd. Like, why didn't the attack happen during those previous declines is something that the 2NR was silent on, kind of because it was not until the 2AR, but it's a reference to a 2NR card about the 22% drop. So, that's just like a logical problem I can't really find my way around. Fantastic debate. It's the last time I judge you all. It's been very much of a pleasure.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, deal.
Forget these fools. Don't talk to them.
It is possible.
They'll suck, Georgia.
Can I say one thing about this? Like, I thought you were really onto something with like the requirements of the AF, like comprehensive, universal, portable, all of those things, don't exactly line up with the AF's cooperative federalism advantage, because those are really stringent requirements that all the states have to do, and they're like two solvency cards I think are in really not at all talking about the same proposal. One is like, waive it, leave it up to the states, we'll figure out later what's good, and the other one is like, waive it, but very, very stringent requirements, and I think there's a counterpoint to be written that waives it, doesn't solve advantage 1 and 2 very well, but definitely link turns advantage 3, and base is still probably a net benefit to it. So I thought you were kind of getting there in the cross-ex, but I don't think this app is, the first two advantages are not very good. And then for you all, I kind of think that if you debate this base DA, this federalism link turn to, I guess this is kind of contradictory to what I just said, but federalism link turn to the base DA is like something I think that you are saying that makes a lot of sense, the Ryan Care type kind of like devolution business. Cards for that, I thought were like would be helpful. You were like, I think both the 1AR and the 2AR were like, our whole 1AC calls our app Ryan Care. It's like, it'd be a card for help.
One card that briefly mentions the language on replacing the 1AC, which is like not enough at all.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on that. I think a lot more aggro on if Trump does it, it doesn't really matter. They're gonna love it. They'll think it's awesome. Bigly time. It's anti-big government, pro-states' rights. Even if there's like some tax increases, it ultimately fulfills the promise, and they'll just eat it up. Yeah, do you have anything else? The only thing I haven't judged you before, Bernstein. There was like a clear few times I didn't interject, but I would say my advice for you would be slow down to go faster, because I think what you're doing right now is like, it's not that you're missing words, but it's like you'll skip one and come back and kind of do like the double clutch. I honestly think you'll get more content out if you dial it back like 10%.
I think it was partially just like new 1AC that happened.
Yeah. I just think like the smooth rate of delivery will ultimately, you'll get as, like, I want to go fast isn't always the best intuition. I thought the 1AR was much better and a really good speech, but that would, like, pretty big comment for delivery.
Do you think T is like an option, or is the card not there?
I didn't look at the cards.
Didn't either.
So let me quickly pull up the flow so I can talk a little intelligently about it.
Let's see.
I don't think your card really supports like the cross-exes, and then I think you said like Medicaid is a topical app.
Like the public option or something?
Public option.
Oh,
I think Medicaid
I was
is.
trying to say like expand Medicare as a topical app.
We should expand Medicaid too, which is like expanding Medicaid
which is-
involves the states. It's like
yeah.
So I don't know. There were some kind of precision problems with I had with the way that the card, I read the card and some of the things that were happening in the 2NC, so not as much for me.
Yeah, I'm looking at the interp pretty lightly. I think intuitively, I think T would be viable, but I think more tied to the interp stuff and probably more cards as well.
And it's always tough against a new case, because you're trying to make those deep thoughts on how it's topical, but, I'd have to look at the wording of the plan, but, what happens if the state says no? Or does something that's just, half-assed, and it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it, but you'll give us some money, but we don't need very much, because we're gonna do it through pure private sector, and that maybe it's the requirement of having the Fed do the whole thing is essential to not make, right, the actual coverage can't become conditional.
Yep.
Right, where you're not sure whether or not it happens. And the only way to guarantee that is to have the federal government be the whole actor. It's like, we pass a law that says insurance companies have to do everything, but the insurance companies all fold up and leave town, then has the plan actually resulted in anything? What is the guaranteeing mechanism? And that's important for negative ground. Because the 1AC, doesn't really hinge totally on the coverage question. Right? They could get away with kind of dismissing that and going for the other transparency stuff or some of their other solvency mechanisms. But as you were debating in this debate, I think you made the right choice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think I know the answer to this, but just to clarify, it's better to AR would have just been to go for the straight turn to the incremental DA and to the DA, answering the DA as opposed to going for all of our offense. I just felt like it was a risky path, and I felt like I had enough time to do both and be a little safer.
Yeah, I totally agree on that second part. I think
Okay.
I wouldn't have adjusted the strategy because it really can't hurt you unless you needed that time over there. And maybe if that time difference was you directly addressing taxes or something, but I think you had time to do that,
Right.
Potentially still. I do not have any questions about the 2AR strategy.
And the only other thing that I would think about is kind of like a panel perspective. It can kind of be seen as like a weird desperation move. It's like, we're going all in on the straight turn.
That's what I was hearing.
I think are doing an okay enough job. I think it seems like all of us are on the low risk, but it turns the impact of the DA, so.
Above zero.
Yeah, I'm with you. If you wanted to do something with that advantage differently, shave it down to just retail, and then jettison extinction and stuff like that, and that I think gets me above zero.
Yeah, and I think even in the 1AR, we should just put a retail card. That makes it better.
Did you not have one of the 1AC?
We did. It was just not
It says more is
highlighted
probable.
enough. It's like.
Yeah, my question was not like, where is the retail card? Like, where is Rachel? Yeah, it's like it was super embedded for me, and it's just like, where's the card? I'd like to see the card.
If I was going to change anything, I might have put the straight turn first.
Okay.
Right, because that's the bigger advantage. It's the guaranteed impact. You can sell it as try or die. They've said it's inevitably collapsing.
Yeah.
The impact is conceded. 100% certainty here on
Right.
all the internals. The only question is here, and how much do we solve? And then I think that's your stronger advantage. So start with that offense, so it gets that punch at the top of the 2AR. But
Yeah, because the other thing I was thinking about was going for just that impact, so going for both the cooperative federalism add-on and the term of we fix the health insurance industry. I just wasn't sure, intuitively, about whether we could win enough of the internal to the cooperative federalism advantage. Simply because I think that'd be better than.
Well, the sanctuary cities thing is a big problem. That would need some
Yeah.
2AR explanation, and you might just be totally right that the 1AR kind of was too light on that question to
Yeah.
revive it. But that part of it is certainly 100% solves their internal.